Chapter 516 Wordstern. He's going to be crucial for when we escape? My interest was immediately piqued when I heard his words. In an attempt to quench my curiosity, I asked, "Who exactly is he?" But my other self simply shook his head. "You will find out once you challenge him." Closing my eyes, I let out a long sigh. As usual, he would always leave out the more important details for later. What a terrible habit. So I won't be fighting against the current emperor? Not yet. A narrow grin spread across my other self's face as he replied. If you were to fight him right now, you would only end up losing. Involuntarily, my brows furrowed as I tilted my head. You serious? Yeah. Processing the information, my eyes closed. So another one who is stronger than me. Honestly, I was quite troubled by his apparent confidence in his prediction of my inevitable defeat against the present emperor. It just didn't sit tight with me. Was I just that competitive? Wasn't too sure. With my eyes closed and letting out a short breath, I inquired about the current emperor. For you to say what you said, the emperor must be incredibly strong. Sort of. My other self replied. In a tight brow furrow, I stared. Sort of? What do you mean? He may be strong, but that isn't the reason why I am saying that you will lose against him if you two fought. Continue. Taking in more of what he was saying, my ears perked up. I had a feeling that his next words were going to be extremely important. The games are rigged. Sylvestar, the current emperor, will be made the next overlord in the next match. What? And I wasn't wrong, as his follow-up made my eyes shoot wide open. Hold on, what are you talking about? Doesn't Edward still have over 30 matches left before he gains freedom? Shouldn't he still be fine? You're right. My other self gave a short nod. But there are two main fundamental reasons for this action. The first reason you should already know. Yeah. Edward still had over 30 matches left before he gained his freedom, but to avoid making it appear rigged, he was purposely set to lose a bit before that. Even then. Why this early? Regardless of how many matches he lost before hitting 100, I was fairly confident that nobody would find it strange. So there must be another reason. And I didn't wait for long to know the answer. He's not far from breaking through to the next rank. My head snapped in the direction of my other self. Pricking my ears with my fingers to make sure I didn't hear incorrectly, I asked again. What did you say? Can you repeat that? No. But my other self just shook his head. I shrugged my shoulders. Whatever. I had only asked because I wasn't sure I had heard wrongly. That didn't seem to be the case. Massaging my forehead, I took a deep breath. I guess it makes more sense now. Since the demons overlooking the place were both dukes themselves, if Edward broke through, his strength would reach a similar level to theirs. This in itself was a threat to their authority, prompting them to act. Scratching the bottom of my chin, I pondered out loud. So the reason why we created all that chaos before coming here was because we wanted to attract the attention of some of the upper echelon away from the arena. Correct. I glanced at my other self, whose only reply was a brief glance. But that was enough. If that's the case, it makes more sense for the current Duke to be rushing things. Clearly, the other Duke had left the territory based on the fact that the current Duke seemed to be rushing. Had the two of them been together, Edward's rank up wouldn't have bothered them too much. Since the entire city was now under the watchful eye of only one Duke-ranked demon, the appearance of someone of similar strength would put it at risk. Not only that, but so would his life. There was no way he would just sit by and watch something like this unfold. He was planning on having Edward killed before he ranked up. In the midst of my pondering, I had a sudden thought. If they are so afraid of Edward, why not just kill him directly instead of making someone else do it? Do you even need to ask? Have you forgotten which clan we're in? My question was met with another question. Glancing at him for a second, I shook my head. Never mind. Right. This was the Pride clan. Of course, their pride wouldn't allow them to do that. Stupid. I thought as I clapped my hands together. All right. Taking a look at myself from the other side, I stretched my neck. I already have an idea of what I'm supposed to do. Taking another glance in my direction, he disappeared from his spot without saying anything. Having become accustomed to his actions, I tapped my bracelet and took out a piece of paper and a pen. Grasping the body of the pen tightly, I began writing on the paper. The next few minutes flew by since I already knew what I wanted to write on the paper. And done. My tongue dipped out of my mouth as I put the pen away. With the letter inside, I placed a couple of things in the small dimensional space the size of a small ball. This should be enough. It wasn't until I was satisfied with what I had put in that I looked for the door and knocked. Thank God they didn't search me. To talk. For a brief moment of time I was met with no response. Fortunately, I did not have to wait for long as the door soon opened and a demon appeared opposite me. My gaze was met by the demon's cold gaze. His croaky, brittle voice echoed in the air as he opened his mouth. What do you want? I would like to pay respect to the current overlord. Ha! The demon's face changed a little. In spite of this, he grumbled in a quiet whisper and nodded after some thought. This might be fun. My ears were able to pick up the whisper of his voice despite it being extremely quiet. Though I was slightly apprehensive after hearing him speak, I decided to follow through with my plans anyway. As long as I managed to meet Edward, then everything was all right. Follow me. Okay. Closing the door behind me, I followed the demon. While staring at the ceiling of his room, Edward muttered something. How long has it been now? His eyes were out of focus and his emotions were numb. The 4 years he had spent in this hellhole were taking a toll on him. But just a little bit more. He ended up muttering as he clenched his hands into a fist and a powerful aura erupted from his body. The end was in sight. There was only a little more struggle he had to endure before he could regain his freedom. Just a little bit more. To talk. A knock came on the door of his room and the aura coming out of his body dwindled quickly. In an instant, Edward's face turned grim as he glanced at the door. What do you want? The echo of his deep voice filled the room. An answer was provided after a while by a croaking voice. It was a voice Edward was all too familiar with. One that belonged to a demon. Someone is here to pay his respects. Send them back. As he grimly replied, Edward wore a look of repulsion on his face. This wasn't the first time that something like this had happened in the past. Due to his current position as the top dog in the arena, everyone wanted to curry favor with him, but he didn't pay any attention to them. The fact that he knew better than to trust anyone here did not even compel him to glance at them or bother to listen to them. The same could be said for the current situation. But the demon behind the door seemed insistent. The person that wishes to meet you is a human. A human. Edward paused for a moment. Following a few moments of thought, he eventually shook his head. Send him away. Humans weren't quite rare here. In fact, he had already seen multiple during his stay. It was initially his intention to meet them, but after a while he knew better not to, as they would come at him all vying to protect them or form some sort of alliance. The only thing they wanted was for him to protect them, which was something he wasn't keen on doing. His goal was not to babysit them but to gain freedom. Anything that would impede him from doing so was his enemy. Human says he has recently migrated from the human world to this one and asks for your advice. Just then Edward's head snapped upwards. Did you just say he came from the human world just recently? Does that mean that he knows about the current situation with Amanda? While taking a few deep breaths to calm himself, his heartbeat unknowingly started to beat faster. Closing his eyes for a moment, he waved his hand. Let him in. As you wish. Click. It was a white-haired man with deep blue eyes who slowly emerged from behind the door as the demon's voice echoed through the space. I will be staying here to supervise the stay. In a brief glance, Edward glanced at the demon before examining the white-haired figure. The moment his eyes paused on the figure, Edward's brows twitched for a moment. He looks familiar. Though it had been quite a while since he had been in the human domain, he felt an odd sense of familiarity as he looked at the figure in front of him. Did I meet him somewhere before? He eventually shook his head and mumbled to himself. I don't think I'd forget someone that looks like him so easily. No matter how he tried to think, he couldn't quite recall where he had seen him. White hair and deep blue eyes. He would have remembered someone who looked like that had he met him in the past. Hello. At that moment, the white-haired figure stopped and smiled at him. My name is White Reaper and it is an honor to finally meet you, Mr. Overlord. He then extended his hand in his direction. Chapter 517. Staring at the hand that reached out for him, Edward didn't immediately take it. Rather, he continued to carefully scrutinize the individual in front of him. He's not simple. That was the conclusion he came up with after carefully examining him. As the guild master of the first-ranked guild in the human domain, Edward had the ability to discern with a glance whether someone was more than what met the eye. Raising his head, their eyes met. White Reaper, right? Yes, that's my name. What a peculiar name. Lowering his head, Edward's eyes paused on his extended hand. At that moment he was astonished to discover two small words written on his index finger. Play along. Closing his eyes, Edward's face remained stoic. Although he was surprised, he knew better than to show his outer emotions. Taking his eyes away from the hand, he glanced at the individual in front of him. Once their eyes met, the ends of the White Reaper's lips curled ever so slightly. Edward's head cocked slightly as he noted this. All right, I'll play along. Was it perhaps because of the sense of familiarity he gave off? Or was it because of something else? In the end he decided to play along. What do you want? There was a slight tremor in the room as he opened his mouth. He was acting as he normally did when someone tried to meet him. Lowering his head to glance at his hand, he smacked it away. He then indifferently muttered. Smack. Be quick, I don't have much time. Nothing special. The smile on White Reaper's face stiffened a tad bit. He then replaced it with a flattering one as he clasped his hands together. Well, I just wanted to pay my respects to you. Respect. Edward's eyes squinted. What are you trying to get at? He couldn't quite understand what he was trying to get at. Regardless, he continued to act as he normally did. Glancing at the demon waiting at the door, he ordered. Get him out of my sight. What? White Reaper's face changed. Turning his head back to glance at the demon waiting at the door, he raised his hands. Hold on a second, I'm not done speaking. Focusing his attention back toward Edward, he spoke in a rather rushed manner. Mr. Overlord, please hear me out. There was clear panic on his face as he said those words. Of course, having seen what was written on his hand, Edward knew that he was acting. But what exactly is he trying to tell? It was then that he finally saw it. It disappeared as fast as it came, but Edward was able to see it. A small black ball that was resting in the middle of his tongue. Is that a dimensional space? Taking note of the black ball, Edward already seemed to get an idea of what the individual wanted him to do. Did you not hear me? Edward pressed his hand in a downward motion. A terrifying pressure pressed against White Reaper's body as Edward channeled his mana into the air, forcing him to fall to his knees. Thud. Edward grimly glanced down at White Reaper who was lying on the ground. Did you not hear what I just said? Pressing his right hand on the ground, White Reaper forcefully raised his head to stare at Edward. There was clear hatred in his eyes as he stared at him. Opening his mouth, he spoke through his gnashed teeth. I'm a human. Shouldn't you be helping me? I should help you because you're a human? Edward scoffed and bent down until his eyes stood at the same level as White Reaper. Bringing his head closer, he softly muttered. Let me give you a reality check. Had you not been human, you would have already found yourself seal. Spur. In the midst of completing his sentence, White Reaper spat on his face. Edward was quick to react. Right as White Reaper was about to spit, Edward noticed the movement of his jaw and brought his hand forward and blocked his mouth, stopping the spit from reaching his head. As Edward secretly grasped the black ball that was hidden in the spit, he glared at White Reaper. You. He raised his hand and slapped White Reaper in the face. The movement was so fast that White Reaper was unable to react on time. Bang. With a powerful crashing sound, White Reaper was sent crashing against the wall. Yuck. Letting out a pained groan, White Reaper's body slowly slid toward the ground. Take him away. Edward ordered as he turned his body and no longer looked back at White Reaper. Kiki. Letting out a chuckle, the demon helped White Reaper up and dragged his body up. It had to be noted that it was only after the conflict was over that the demon moved into action. Clearly, he was expecting such a scene to occur from the very beginning. You bastard. On his way out, Edward could hear White Reaper's enraged shout. Mark my words, as soon as I become the next emperor, I'll fucking kill you. I'll fucking kill you. But his words went deaf ears as Edward continued to ignore him. Clank. The door eventually closed and silence returned to the room. Instead of immediately checking out the contents of the dimensional space, Edward put the orb away and continued to meditate in the middle of the room. That said, right before putting the orb away, he was able to check what was inside of the dimensional space. What he found was a piece of paper and a couple of other things. Even though he wanted to check the contents immediately, he stopped himself from doing so. There was no doubt in his mind that every move he made was being closely monitored by the demons. Therefore, the only thing he could do was be patient. Ugh, that hurt. Dumped back into my room, I massaged my shoulder as I leaned my back against the wall. Ugh, although I wanted him to hit me, he should have held back a bit. Taking out a potion, I quickly ingested it. The pain in my shoulder slowly subsided. Ha! Letting out a relieved sigh, I stared at the ceiling of the room. If everything works out correctly, we should be able to escape soon, right? Yes. A voice answered as a figure appeared at the other end of the room. If Edward heeds your words, you will be able to escape soon. Leaning my head against the wall, I muttered. Nice. Try the lworld.com platform for the most advanced reading experience. I wanted nothing more than to get out of this place as fast as possible. Taking my eyes away from the ceiling of the room, I recalled something. Now that I think about it, shouldn't I be given a new room? Now that I had beaten Skullcrusher, I had rightfully become a top 10 contender. This meant that I would soon get a new room. One that was bigger and more comfortable than this room. Kind of wanted it. Massaging my chin, my eyes turned into narrow slits. There's only one problem. And that was the fact that the room was probably going to be monitored by the demons. My brows furrowed at the thought. I guess I should finish all my preparations now. Standing up from my bed, I stretched my back and immediately got to work. I had to make the most of my time if I wanted to escape within the next week. At the same time, throughout a large office space, an amused voice echoed. Something like that happened? Yes, Your Excellency. Duke Anazek drummed his long and slender fingers on his desk while holding his hand over his mouth to hide the smile on his face. What an interesting development. He murmured after a while. With one knee to the ground, his servant noticed the Duke's interest and asked, Is there anything you would like me to do, Your Excellency? Duke Anazek glanced at his servant before responding. Monitor him closely. In the off chance that something goes wrong in the next match, we can make use of him to get rid of the current overlord. As you wish. The servant's figure slowly merged in the shadows as he placed his hand over his chest. Silence returned to the room. With his gaze lingering on the spot where his servant left, Duke Anazek took a deep breath. A cold light flashed in his eyes when he opened them again. This might be even better than I thought. To talk. Overhearing a loud knock at his door, Edward raised his head. What is it? Your match will begin in 2 hours. Answering him was the demon that guarded the entrance to his room. Understood. Replying to the demon, Edward calmly walked to his desk and sat down. He then took out a piece of paper from his dimensional space. I should have no problems looking at this now. 4 days had passed since White Reaper's visit, and during those days, Edward had not once touched the things that were inside of the dimensional space that was given to him. It was simply too risky to do it in an area that was most likely monitored. Since then, he had been sitting down at his desk every day and picking up a piece of paper to write on. In order to make the real paper look less suspicious, he decided to use this method. Taking a deep breath, he secretly took out the piece of paper from his dimensional space and placed it on the desk. Let's see what your intentions are. He could finally see what White Reaper was trying to tell him. To Edward Stern. The moment Edward's eyes stopped on the first sentence of the letter, his hands shook and he almost lost his cool. If not for his tough mentality, his face would have already changed. Calming his unevenly beating heart, he proceeded to read the message. You probably don't remember me, but we've met once before. Back then, my hair wasn't exactly white, so that probably explains the reason why you didn't recognize me. But that isn't really important at the moment. The reason why I'm contacting you like this is simple. It's because I have to tell you something really important. Your next match is rigged. Pausing, Edward's brows furrowed tightly. Rigged? What is he talking about? He continued to read the letter. I know what I'm saying sounds strange, but the competition is rigged. It doesn't matter how many matches you win, you won't be free again. The demons use this strategy to make this show more thrilling by making you fight with everything on the line. After all, who doesn't want freedom? Anyhow, during your next match, the demons intend to get rid of you by rigging the device that suppresses your rank. It will only be for a brief moment, but they will stop your mana flow to create an opening for your opponent. Clenching his teeth, Edward tried his best to suppress his boiling rage that was threatening to come out any second now. I should have known better. Clenching his teeth even harder, he continued to read the letter. If you trust me, I will help you escape. You may not know, but I know your daughter quite well. Furthermore, when I said that we've met before, that wasn't a lie. Remember the proposal with the magic card system? That was me. Huh. Rereading the sentence again, Edward had a hard time processing the information. How is this possible? From the moment the magic cards were mentioned, Edward had already figured out who White Reaper was. But it was exactly because he knew who he was that he was having a hard time grasping the information. Rindover. That was the name of the youth that had presented him with the magic cards concept a couple of years ago. He had set quite a positive impression in his mind back then. But that was all that impression amounted to. After all, he had met many such talented youths in the past. As far as he was concerned, he was just a dime of a dozen. But what happened to him? How did he become so strong in such little time? Last he recalled, he was nowhere near what it was now. In just 4 years he managed to climb all the way to where he was now? A rank that was near his? Wasn't that a little bit too frightening? Lowering his head, he continued to read the letter. The reason why I'm telling you my identity is to make you trust me more. I know that you have a lot of questions, but we don't really have the time. All I can say is that I can help you meet Amanda again. All you have to do is follow my instructions. And so, for the last remaining time before his match, Edward carefully scrutinized the letter in his hand. Chapter 5:18 Clank. A clamping sound echoed out when the two ends of the suppressor were connected together. Done. Taking a step back, a marquee-ranked demon carefully examined Edward. Currently he was checking to see if the suppressor was working or not. After observing him for a bit, he noted an evident decrease in pressure his body was giving out. It's working. This was a clear indication that the suppressor had worked. Having achieved Edward's rank suppression, the demon walked away with a satisfied smile on his face, leaving Edward standing alone by the gateway leading to the area. A couple of more words made their way through his mouth before he left. You know the procedure. Once your name is called up and the gates open, you go fight. Amichum. With a slight nod, Edward turned to glance at the bracelet on his wrist. How odd. Clenching and unclenching his fist, it took him a bit to get used to the sensation of his strength dropping. While this was not his first experience of having his rank suppressed, it still felt quite odd to him. I don't think I'll ever get used to this feeling. Taking his eyes away from his bracelet, his focus shifted to the gate in the distance. The one that led to the arena. Pricking his ears up, he could feel the loud cheers of the crowd. As Edward breathed in deeply, his eyes flashed with a dangerous light as he thought back to his plan. Relaxing his clenched hand, he softly mumbled, I'm ready. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the arena, two figures stood apart. An anxious voice echoed out. The voice belonged to none other than Silvermoon, who looked at Silverstar with a worried look on her face. How sure are you that you will win this match? Very sure. Silverstar replied with a confident smile on his face. While he knew he was up against a very strong opponent, he grew more confident as he felt the small device in his hand. With the demons backing him up, he knew that he couldn't lose. In a soothing tone, he fluttered his long silver eyelashes. Don't worry. There's no way I will lose. But we still don't know much about our opponent. It doesn't matter. Silverstar quickly interjected as he looked at Silvermoon. So what if we've never seen all of his skills? My trump card is far stronger than any skill he can bring. A device that could cut Edward's mana flow for a brief moment of time. What better reassurance could he have other than this? With such a device in his hands, Silverstar felt his victory guaranteed. Biting her lips, Silvermoon slowly nodded her head. Okay. With a gentle stroke, Silverstar reassured her once more. Don't worry too much. It might look like I'm struggling at the beginning of the match, but that will be on purpose. It was inevitable that he would need to start slowly in order to make the fight appear less rigged. If he won right off the bat, the spectators would clearly be able to tell that the match was rigged. Despite this small handicap, Silverstar was confident in holding out in the beginning. The Overlord may be strong, but so was he. King Bracket Emperor, your match is about to begin. It was then that a demon called out for him. Caressing Silvermoon's head one more time, a soft smile appeared on Silverstar's face. Trust me, I will get the both of us out of this shithole. The match that one of you has been waiting for is finally about to start. Winking at the audience, a slim figure appeared in the middle of the arena. In the vast arena, her sweet and seductive voice could be heard resonating throughout. Let's welcome the challenger to today's event, the Emperor of the Duke bracket, and the winner of the previous bout between him and the Emperor of the King bracket, Emperor Silverstar. Plike, plike, plike. As the gates on the left side of the arena slowly pushed up, the rattling sound of chains being pulled echoed throughout the arena grounds. Emerging from the other side of the arena was an elegant figure with long silver hair and a beautiful face that was devoid of any imperfections. Entering the arena, the crowd instantly erupted into cheers. Silverstar. Emperor. Beat him. Ignoring the cheers, Silverstar walked steadily toward the center of the arena. The lofty way he carried himself as he walked toward the center of the arena gave the impression that he was arrogant, as if he thought he was above those around him. Upon stopping his feet, the demoness extended her hand toward the other side of the arena. All forms of noise within the arena stopped. The demoness secretly smiled when she noticed this. This was just how influential an overlord was. On our right side, a figure who has climbed the ranks from the very bottom of the food chain to prove many of us wrong. He is someone everyone in this room knows and who, regardless of the circumstance, managed to triumph against his opponent. Please welcome the current overlord, the Blood Prince. Plike, plike, plike. Her words led the gates on the other side of the arena to slowly open, and an obscure figure appeared on the other side. A haggard but handsome face, broad shoulders, and a presence that engulfed the whole arena. Blood Prince, the current overlord, had finally taken a step into the arena grounds. The arena instantly became tense. New novel understandings are published here. lworld.com. As everyone stared in his direction without saying a word, the steady sound of his footsteps resonated heavily in their ears. Like clockwork, Edward's every step seemed to remind the audience of how little time Silverstar had left before his untimely death. Stopping right in front of Silverstar, Edward's gaze paused on him, and a stare-down ensued between the two of them as their eyes met. In the end, the inevitable loser ended up being Silverstar, who was unable to bear the pressure coming out of Edward's body, resulting in him lowering his head in defeat. Keish. Edward glanced at the bracelet on his wrist briefly as he turned his gaze away from Silverstar. I will make this quick. Are you two ready? Once again, the demoness' voice echoed throughout the arena. Yes. Yes. Edward nodded first, followed by Silverstar, who looked at him with a challenging look. Edward promptly ignored it and took a couple of steps back. As soon as he got into position, he turned his attention to Silverstar, who was now standing leisurely on the opposite side of the arena. Silverstar's relaxed and casual attitude made Edward even more apprehensive as he started to secretly channel all the mana inside of his body. Extending his right hand to the side, a splendid long spear adorned with a few cores alongside the shaft of the spear appeared in his hands. A bloodthirsty aura emanated from the spear, causing some of the weaker demons in the stand to tremble. Bloodborne. An rank artifact that belonged to Edward and had accompanied him throughout his whole life. Had it not been for this spear, he would have most likely not made it as far as he had. While he wasn't one to complain, he was surprised that they allowed him to fight with it, since it proved to be an extremely powerful weapon. Suddenly, the demoness' voice echoed across the arena as she lowered her hand, marking the beginning of the fight. You may begin. Immediately after her words fell, Edward's mana that had been suppressed all the way down to rank sprung out of his body and enveloped the entire arena. Closing his eyes, he muttered under his breath. Come. After the heir's mana shrank, it accosted his spear, resulting in a long blood-red spear that was more than twice the size of the original. In addition, the strength emanating from it was far more compact and powerful than before. It felt as though he was holding a completely different spear. Not only that, at the same time the mana agglomerated toward his spear, he proceeded to activate all of his skills at once. B. Hyperflux. For a short period of time following activation, the user will experience an increase in mana circulation. B. Sensory enhancement. Upon activation, the user will find their senses enhanced to their utmost limits. Blood expulsion. Upon activation, the user can target an individual and freeze their blood flow, impairing their mobility for a brief period of time. The latest understandings are on lworld.com website. There was no chance for anyone to react to the subsequent events, as everything happened so fast that time stood still. Wying. Whying. Sylvestar's face changed dramatically as he felt his blood turn cold as thin white threads sprang from the ground and stabbed into his calves like sharp needles. The pain was negligent but the effects were disastrous. Huh. Once the threads entered Sylvestar's body and his blood froze, Edward finally took a step forward. Grasping his spear with both hands, he thrust forward, veins bulging by the side of his head. The thrust was neither too fast nor too slow. The spear thrust only looked like a regular spear thrust, but all the spectators looked at the spear as though they were in a trance. They simply couldn't take their eyes away from it. Each time they blinked, they would catch a glimpse of a blood-colored dragon entangling itself on the spear's body. When the dragon opened its jaws wide, exposing its sharp teeth, a sense of majesty emanated from the spear. What happened next made the jaws of some of the spectators drop as a thunderous roar reverberated throughout the whole arena. Roar. At the precise moment the dragon roared, a massive red wave of energy rushed towards Sylvestar like an unstoppable tsunami. Trying to raise his legs that were bound by the white threads, Sylvestar clenched his teeth and screamed. Not like this. Not like this. His eyes became crazier and crazier with each second that passed. Trying to clench his fist, he tried to use the device that was given to him by Duke Anazek, but it ended up being a futile effort. He was unable to move his body. No. Despite his struggle against the white threads that were blocking him from moving, his fight proved futile as the wave soon arrived and it rapidly engulfed his entire body, obliterating every trace of his existence. Hiya! At the last moment, just before his figure disappeared, everyone in the stands was able to pick up his anguish-filled scream. Boom! Another thunderous explosion resonated throughout the arenas. Rumble. Rumble. As dust rose in the air, the whole arena began to shake as the attack collided with the side of the arena. A while passed before the dust settled, and at that moment, the spectators dared not utter a word as they focused their attention on the arena's center. It was at this point that everyone caught sight of Edward's imposing figure standing in the middle of the arena holding onto his spear. Unknowingly, the spectators' gazes were drawn to him due to the majestic presence his body was giving out. Across from him was a long scar extending to the other end of the arena as cracks curved along its sides. Thump. Amidst the silence, rubble slowly fell down to the ground. Reappearing in the middle of the arena, the demoness had a shocked expression on her face. Opening her mouth, she stuttered for a bit as she struggled to find the right words to say. It was clear that she was still shaken by what had happened. And the winner of today's marches, and still the overlord of the arena. Overlord Worldbreaker. Her words marked the end of the match, and it was from there that the cheers finally returned. Wah! Blood Prince. Overlord. Chapter 519. This was out of my expectations. Duke Anazek's face was tinged with solemnity as he gazed at the arena from one of the platforms. Pondering over the events that had just transpired, his brows furrowed tightly. How odd. What's odd about the situation, Your Excellency? Appearing from behind was his servant. Without looking back, Duke Anazek replied. Have you ever seen the Blood Prince go all out from the beginning? Musing for a moment, the servant shook his head. No, it has never happened before. That's right, it has never happened before. There had never been a time when the Blood Prince had started from the very beginning with such vigor. To gauge his opponent's strength, he tended to always start slowly before ending it. Furthermore, he displayed several skills that he had never demonstrated before. Isn't the situation odd? It's as you say, Your Excellency. As he listened to the Duke's reasoning, the servant became increasingly curious about the situation. Have there been any strange movements from the Blood Prince the last few days? Pondering for a moment, the servant shook his head. There haven't. Nothing at all? Lowering his head, the servant suddenly thought of something. Nothing concrete, but most recently the Blood Prince has been spending his time either training or writing some things. Writing? The Duke's interest was piqued. Turning around, he asked. Tell me more about this writing. As you wish. Placing his hand over his chest and taking a knee to the ground, the servant started to explain. A couple of days ago, Blood Prince had started spending his time writing in his own room. He spends an average of an hour on each letter, and he has been writing them at the same time each day. Is there any knowledge of the contents of the thing he wrote? Yes. The servant nodded. There were times when the blood prince would casually toss some of the letters away, and from there he was able to learn of its contents. It appears to be letters addressed to his daughter that he misses. Duke Anazeka's eyes squinted. Opening his mouth, he asked after a while, "When did this start?" The servant was quick with his reply. "It started a bit after White Reaper's visit." "It started after meeting White Reaper, huh?" Duke Anazek lowered his head and covered his mouth with his hand. He quickly came up with a hypothesis. Could his appearance have caused the Blood Prince to miss his daughter? In light of the fact that both of them were humans, the appearance of White Reaper may have triggered memories from the past to resurface in Blood Prince's mind. This may have resulted in his sudden actions. Even then, keep a close watch on the situation, he quickly ordered. Duke Anazek was cautious by nature. He would never let go of anything no matter how ridiculous it sounded. "Is there anything else that you need to report to me?" Thinking for a moment, the servant recalled something and answered, "Yes." At the same time, "Nu-uh." An anguished scream echoed throughout a small platform that overlooked the arena from above. Silver Moon collapsed to her knees and placed both hands on the glass. Her face turned pale as she gazed in the direction of where Silverstar used to stand. Arun, you told me that you were going to win?" Silver Moon mumbled out Silverstar's real name in a frantic voice. The relationship between the two was special. The two of them were in fact married to each other. It was a relationship that started before they found themselves in this shithole. Had it not been for that accident, Arun, shut up. Her despair was interrupted by an irritated voice. "Ha!" Weakly turning her head, her eyes paused on an individual who was lying on the couch with both of his eyes closed. His sleeping posture was rather weird as he seemed to be snuggling against his sword. Opening her mouth, Silver Moon eventually managed to utter his name. Lightning Dragon. "Yes, that's what they call me." Opening his eye, he briefly glanced at her before closing his eye again. "Now shut up, I'm trying to get some sleep." It took her a while to process his words, and when she did, her face quickly turned red in anger. How did you not hear me?" Cutting her off, Lightning Dragon's eyes snapped open, revealing his two yellow-colored eyes. Raising his head to glance at Silvermoon, his eyes narrowed. "I'm tired of your endless nagging. Do you expect me to give you sympathy?" Carefully putting the sword down on the couch, Lightning Dragon slowly stood up. Gazing toward a platform in the distance, he turned to look at Silvermoon again. "You think I don't know what you did?" Taking a single step forward, an overwhelming pressure bore down on the room. Among the 9 people in the room, not one of them was able to alleviate the pressure bearing down on them. Not a single one of them. Taking a couple of more steps forward, Lightning Dragon's eyes shone with a brilliant yellow hue. Trying frantically to open her mouth, Silvermoon's heartbeat quickened as she gazed into those eyes. Despite her best efforts, she was unable to summon the strength to speak. He was simply too terrifying. "You think I don't know about the things Silverstar tried to pull during his fight?" His next words caused her eyes to shoot wide open. How? Heh. The edges of Lightning Dragon's lips pulled into a slight grin. Raising his hand to point at his eyes, he muttered, "Nothing escapes my sight. I see everything." Hack. At the exact moment those words left his mouth, his eyes shone in an even brighter hue of yellow as Silvermoon suddenly found herself grasping her neck with both hands. Spit flew out of her mouth as she struggled to mouth a single word. Raising her head, she turned to look at the other people in the room. Reaching out her hand, she begged for help. Help. But it was all futile. Turning their heads, everyone in the room glanced away from her. Silvermoon's eyes opened wide when she saw this. "After all, ID for you?" Everyone apart from Lightning Dragon was where they were because of her and Silverstar. Yet, the moment that Silverstar died, no one dared to spare her a glance. Upon realizing the harsh reality of the situation, Silvermoon's eyes dulled and she stopped speaking. The pressure that was bearing down on her had long stopped taking effect. Lightning Dragon shook his head as he looked at the other people in the room. "Spineless," he muttered under his breath as he turned around and headed back to the sofa. As he was walking back to the sofa, he managed to utter a couple of more words. "Do me a favor and shut up. I'm trying to sleep. To talk." But it was then that someone knocked on the door. Without waiting for anyone's permission, the door flung open and a couple of demons entered the room. Lightning Dragon's feet came to a pause. What is it now? Lightning Dragon was really starting to get annoyed now. It was one annoyance after another. When would they let him peaceful sleep? Unaware of what had transpired moments prior, the demons scanned the place before focusing their attention on Lightning Dragon. Once they managed to catch sight of him, a demon stepped up and announced, "Lightning Dragon, you have been challenged to a match." A match. The frown on his face tightened. Am I allowed to refuse? You cannot. Without saying anything, Lightning Dragon's face remained impassive. Opening his mouth, he asked, "Who is challenging me?" "White Reaper." Looks like I didn't need to interfere. I muttered as I gazed at Edward, who was standing in the middle of the arena. On the off chance that something did go wrong and Edward had not read the letter, I had planned on interfering with the match. Not directly, but through the usage of the one. It was an extremely risky plan, but I was fortunate enough to not use it. Taking my eyes away from my arena, I glanced toward my right. You already know what to do next. I do. I nodded my head. I've already sent the application. Moments before the match between Edward and Sylvestar started, I had sent my own application to fight. The target was Lightning Dragon. Before your fight starts, use this chance to break through to the next rank. If you don't, you'll have a hard time beating him. My other self reminded me. I waved my hand in annoyance. How am I supposed to do that when there is barely any mana here? It would have been understandable if I was back on Earth where the mana was denser. However, I was currently in the demon world. A place that barely had any mana, if any. Not only that, but I've also broken through like 5 months ago. How do you expect me to break through when I can barely feel the sensation telling me that I can break through? Whenever I was on the verge of breaking through, there would be this weird tingling sensation coursing down my body whenever I channeled the mana inside of my body. At the moment, I didn't feel such a sensation. New novel understandings are published here. lworld.com. Simply put, I was still a little bit away from reaching the next rank. Idiot. What? My forehead creased. Did I miss something? Don't tell me you forgot you're a top 10 contender? Oh. I snapped my fingers. Right, I almost forgot about this. Apart from a better room, top contenders would gain access to more resources. That said, I don't think that will be enough for me to break through. Although I wasn't exactly far from reaching the next rank, I was also not very close. For me to break through to rank, I needed something special. You're right, but did you forget about what we discussed a while back? Right. Raising my head, I massaged my forehead. There's that too. There was one reason why Sylvestar wanted to create a group. It wasn't because he wanted to help the others, but because he wanted to gain their resources. In exchange for a spot in the top 10, the contenders were to hand over to him a part of the resources they would get. It was a simple deal. Anyhow, now that he was dead, it meant that the resources he had kept with him were free for anyone to get. This is allowed, right? It technically belongs to the current overlord, but Duke-ranked resources shouldn't interest him, so he'll probably not care. That and the fact that the overlord is Edward. He wouldn't mind if you take them. All right. I turned around and directly headed for the Sylvestar's room. Unsatisfied with my pace, my other self reminded me. You should hurry. You should arrive before she gets back. You will have the advantage then. All right. What are you doing? Arriving at Sylvestar's room, I was blocked by 2 demons. Staring at the demons, I answered. I'm here to collect his resources. Collect his resources? Yeah. He's dead, so I will take his resources. With confused looks on their faces, the 2 demons stared at each other. It was clear that the demons had no idea how to respond to the situation. After a while, they both grinned and took a step to the side and opened the door. Okay. Since the resources were useless to them, they didn't even think twice about taking them. Furthermore, I could tell from a glance what they were planning on doing. They were probably going to let me take the resources before telling the current overlord of what happened, and thus create a conflict between us. Not only him but with the other top 10 contenders. But it didn't really matter to me. In fact, this was exactly what I wanted. I wanted people to think that my relationship with Edward was terrible. After all, this was the best way for me to catch the Duke's interest. Regarding the others, I frankly did not care. Thank you. Taking a step forward, I entered the room. Chapter 520. Useless, useless, useless. While browsing Sylvestar's belongings, I found myself saddened by the fact that I was unable to locate any of the things that I was looking for. I found the room to be fairly large, about as big as a tennis court, and it was quite beautifully decorated with all kinds of furniture. Plants, flowers, and other nature-related things dominated most of them. But this was expected given his elven nature. Still nothing. I muttered after moving one of the sofas to the side and still not finding anything. I was honestly starting to get quite frustrated. He's a lot more cautious than I originally let him out to be. In all fairness, I should have expected this from the very beginning. After all, given the current environment, who wouldn't? Guess I can only go for the second option. Sitting down on one of the couches, I stopped searching and just relaxed. There was another and simpler way to get the resources. And it should present itself any minute now. What are you doing here? It was then that a familiar voice echoed inside the room as a silver-haired figure entered. There was a seething rage hidden within that voice as the man in the air rippled slightly. Glancing in the direction of the silver figure, I gave her a simple nod. You're here. You're here. Silvermoon's body froze for a split second as she cocked her head to the side. Clearly confused about my intentions. You were waiting for me? She asked. To which I nodded. Yes, I was. Well, sort of. Musing for a moment, she asked. Have you reconsidered my previous offer? No. I shook my head. Standing up from the sofa, I calmly walked in her direction. My intentions in coming here are simple. Stopping in front of her, I extended my hand in her direction. Tell me where Sylvestar's resources are. Immediately after those words left my mouth, Silvermoon's eyes turned bloodshot. The mana in the air rippled and her hair fluttered widely. Seeing how the situation was getting out of hand, I immediately cut her in the middle of her words. How dare why? I can help you get rid of the Overlord. For a moment, the mana coming from her body stopped and her eyes paused on me. Before she could do anything else, I took advantage of the moment and continued speaking. You've already seen what happened when Sylvestar fought against the current Overlord. A total defeat. Silvermoon's face twisted when I said those words. Regardless, I kept pushing. You know yourself that you are weaker than Sylvestar, meaning that you have no chance of ever exacting revenge against the current Overlord. The more I spoke, the more Silvermoon's face twisted. Even then, she never once interrupted me. It was clear that she couldn't dispute any of the words that I was saying. After glancing at her for a moment, I asked. You've probably already heard about what happened between the current Overlord, haven't you? Yes. She nodded her head. The mana that was coming out of her body had already receded back and I was able to get a better look at her complexion. She looked rather haggard as her hair was a mess, and her eyes had a lost look in them. Her current appearance was a far cry from the confident and overbearing one from the past. She was a shell of her former self. But this was understandable. With Sylvestar now dead, what was the point of escaping anymore? Her previous goal was to regain freedom and escape with her husband. But now that he was dead, such an option was no longer feasible. Her mental state was anything but stable. Brushing her hair back, Silvermoon opened her mouth. I don't know a lot, but I heard that you were kicked out by the current Overlord. Indeed. Gnashing my teeth, I pretended to be enraged. A wave of oppressive mana burst out from my body, forcing Silvermoon to take a step back in shock. Bringing my face closer to her, I spat through my gnashed teeth. I only went to him to greet him since we were from the same race, but guess what? Not only was I kicked out of the room, but he even dared to spit on me. How fucking dare he? Prick. I cracked my knuckles. Nice acting. I heard from the side. Trying my best to keep my composure in check, I ignored the voice. Taking a deep breath, the mana that was coming out of my body quickly receded. There were two goals in my bringing out my mana. One, to show her that I truly held a grudge against the current Overlord, and two, directly show her my strength. Show her that I was worth investing in. My hatred for the current Overlord runs as deeply as yours, and I want nothing more than to just kill him as you do. Is this the reason why you came to get his resources? There was a look of melancholy in her eyes as she thought back at Sylvestar. Even then, her hatred for the Overlord ran quite deeply as her eyes regained some clarity. Opening her mouth, I was able to see a trace of her former self. You have seen just how strong the Overlord is. What makes you think you can beat him? Someone whom my husband couldn't even win against. Staring at her for a brief moment of time, I scoffed a little. You don't really have a choice, do you? What do you mean? Silvermoon's eyes narrowed. I smirked slightly in response. Since you yourself are not confident in beating him, then who else but I can? Silvermoon's face changed when I said those words. After a while she clenched her teeth and lowered her head. She couldn't argue back with what I said. I kept pushing. You should already know. I challenged Lightning Dragon for the next match. Whoever wins against us will become the next emperor, since you yourself don't seem to become the next emperor. As I talked, I continued to gauge Silvermoon's reaction. And the more I talked, the more I could see the despair in her face. As I kept pushing, I couldn't help but think. This _ content is taken from lworld.cthom. What a vile strategy. Taking advantage of someone when they were at their lowest point and exploiting them. This was essentially what I was doing at the moment. Not only that, but in reality, this whole scenario had been designed to be this way from the very beginning. I had created a point of connection between Silvermoon and me as a result of telling Edward about the situation regarding the rigged game. With him winning and killing Sylvestar, and given Silvermoon's relationship with Sylvestar, it was only natural for such a scenario to occur. A scenario where she was desperate for Edward's death. However, she knew her limits, and so she could only despair at the thought of never being able to exact revenge against him. This was where I came in and used that connection to manipulate her into giving me the resources her husband had left behind. By giving her hope, I was essentially exploiting her weakened mind. It was honestly quite a vile strategy, but I didn't really care. I was not a saint. And neither were they, as they had also done such schemes in the past. Give me the resources and I will prove to you that you've made the right choice. I lowered my voice to a whisper. Give me the resources and I will avenge your husband. The loud cheers of the crowd reverberated throughout the arena grounds as I stood in the middle of the arena grounds. Whew. Taking a deep breath, I felt the mana inside of my body. Thank God I managed to break through. It was a race against time, but in the end I was able to break through thanks to the resources left behind by Sylvestar. Some of the things he had would have actually been helpful for when I broke through to rank, but given the time constraint, I had no choice but to waste them for my breakthrough. Slowly I opened my eyes. At the exact moment I opened my eyes, I was met with a pair of yellow pupils. The moment I stared into those pupils, I felt a cold chill run down my body. He's strong. All it took was a glance for me to understand that I was not facing someone ordinary. Rather, for the first time in a long time, I finally felt a sense of dread coming out of my opponent. It felt as though I was facing my natural predator. Hugging onto his sword as though it was a teddy bear, Lightning Dragon spared me a single glance before quickly losing interest in me. My forehead creased when I saw this, but I didn't put much thought into it. My mind was as calm as it had ever been. Are the two contestants ready? Suddenly, a familiar voice echoed throughout the entire arena, causing the crowd to become even louder. Glancing at her for a brief moment of time, I gave her a simple nod. Yes. Yes. Lightning Dragon also nodded his head. His relaxed and somewhat lazy attitude was met with even more cheers by the crowd. Fuck him up, Lightning Dragon. Let him know why you are ranked third. The next emperor. In the midst of the crowd's cheers, Lightning Dragon finally opened his mouth. You shouldn't have challenged me. My brow raised. Touching the sheath of my sword, I asked. Why is that? Raising his hand, he yawned. Because I'm sleepy. I frowned when I heard his words. Although they were vague, I knew what he was trying to imply. Because I'm sleepy, I plan on ending this fight quickly to go back to sleep. Is that so? Placing my hand over the sheath of my sword, I grinned. Then all I have to do is not make you sleepy, right? Lowering his head, Lightning Dragon's eyes flashed. He then nodded his head. Yes, you can say so. Squeezing the sword closer to his body, he languidly blinked his eyes. But my eyes see everything. What dough? Before I could say anything else, the demoness voice cut me off. Both contestants, please get ready. With her hand raised, the crowd instantly stopped talking. A sense of tension filled the arena. In the meantime, placing my hand on the sheath of my sword, I started to channel my mana. Feeling her gaze land on me as she alternated her gaze between me and Lightning Dragon, the demoness soon lowered her hand. Fight. As soon as her words faded, I took a step forward and channeled all my mana toward my sword. Click. The first movement of the keiki style. Quick flash. A subtle clicking sound rang out and the area around me was dyed in white. From the get-go I decided to use one of my strongest moves. The first movement of the keiki style. As I had not once used the keiki style, I was planning on catching him off guard from the very start. But, click. The next scene caused my blood to freeze as my heart rate spiked up. Ba, thump, ba, thump. Right as my sword left my sheath, I was left stunned by a loud metallic sound that reverberated throughout the whole arena. Blinking a couple of times, I slowly raised my head. Gazing at the tip of my sword, my mouth opened and closed multiple times. What? I told you, didn't I? A grim voice echoed out. Lowering his head to glance at the tip of my sword, which had been stopped by the body of his sword that was tilted toward the right side of his body, his yellow eyes shone a brilliant yellow hue. I see everything.